Hi, I'm Ross Dickman with the Operations Department at Moorings Park Institute. And I want to thank you for spending a brief period of time with me today to talk about hurricane season 2020 and the preparations that our company will make just so that we are prepared for the possibility of some inclement weather coming our way. I know this is a difficult time to talk about this particular subject, predominantly because of all the difficulty we've experienced during COVID-19. This video is actually being made on the 19th of May. We're about to go into the season, and our partners and our residents have endured a long period of time with the virus. That said, we still have to face off with Mother Nature and the hurricane season that's about to start up. So I wanted to prepare you for that and go through a brief study of the hurricane process, what we do here in Southwest Florida, and then also a little bit about what causes these monstrous storms. I've always felt that having a better understanding of these tremendous forces of nature help you better prepare for them and just gain a better understanding of why they occur and how they cross the ocean and the destruction that they can have if they come anywhere near areas of habitation. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and briefly tell you we're in the season. June 1st starts it officially. And we end the season on November 30th, as indicated on the screen. That doesn't mean a hurricane has never started before June 1st, and it doesn't mean a hurricane has not ever existed after November 30th. But this is a season that we normally see hurricane activity, and the reason behind that is because where hurricanes typically start or initiate in the western coast of Africa, the African continent, the water temperature just about hits 79 to 80 degrees, and that is a requirement for a hurricane to actually be created. So our most intense storms, however, do come later in the year. October is a very difficult month, typically. If you look back historically during hurricanes, you'll see that the most devastating hurricanes have normally occurred in the latter part of the season, although that also doesn't always occur. Andrew, which was one of our most devastating hurricanes ever in Florida, occurred in August of 1992. So, we just need to be prepared, starting from the very beginning. To gain a better understanding of these powerful forces of nature, I wanted to just show you on a brief map where they come from. Now, there is such a thing as a hurricane starting or initiating in the Caribbean, but those are not normally the storms that we have the greatest concern with. The storms that we have the greatest concern typically start over in the western coast of the African continent, and that would be somewhere over by Sierra Leone, okay, and right off of the Cape Verde Islands. And that's an interesting part of the world, and the reason why it's so interesting is because the conditions for creating an unstable air mass, and I'll share with you in just a moment what that means. Those conditions are almost ideal in the Atlantic Ocean. There's a similar location in the Pacific for typhoons, but we're here in North America, and so we are obviously dealing with Atlantic hurricanes. The other reason is because once that hurricane starts, it has such a long distance to build up energy across the Atlantic Ocean before it hits North America. So it's got this long distance of travel from the Cape Verde Islands, Sierra Leone, part of Africa, coming straight across, and it builds up all that energy, all that speed, and it becomes a very, very powerful storm. There are 5 categories of hurricanes. I know you've heard this before. It's always good to go back and revisit what those categories are. The category 1 is 74 to 95 miles per hour. And of course, you can see category 2 is 96 to 110. And then 111 to 130 is a category 3. 131 to 155, a Category 4, and then anything over 155 miles per hour is considered a Category 5, the most devastating hurricane. What is often misunderstood with hurricanes, however, is a Category 1 can be the most devastating of storms because typically the movement of water is what's most devastating in these storms. It is not normally the actual wind velocity or wind-driven rain. There's no question winds of 155 miles per hour are devastating to buildings. But believe it or not, our buildings down here and those that are built on Moorings Park campuses, they're capable of sustaining winds of 150, 160 miles per hour. It doesn't mean that there won't be roofing tiles blown off. Doesn't mean that there won't be some water that gets into the communities or into the residential homes. But these homes are actually quite capable. These buildings are very, very strong. They're built like vaults. But water is what is the killer in a hurricane. Particularly if you have a tidal surge, an increase in the height of the tide coming in, that can do all kinds of destruction, and it's taken out a lot of people and a lot of lives historically. And this is the reason why we never want to underestimate what a Category 1 storm can do. The best example of that was Hurricane Sandy off of New York a number of years ago. Arguably one of the most expensive, one of the most costly storms ever recorded, and it was a Category 1. Every hurricane that comes across the Atlantic Ocean is going to have a dangerous semicircle. And the dangerous semicircle just simply means as it crosses over the Atlantic Ocean and starts to work its way toward North America, as it comes close to our coastline, it's turning in a cyclonic direction. What that essentially means is counterclockwise in North America. Okay, so in the northern hemisphere, everything north of the equator, that hurricane is going counterclockwise. Okay, that means that everything to the right of the center is the most dangerous part of that storm. That's where the highest whipping action exists. So if you look back at Wilma, if you look back at Andrew, if you look at Irma, Charley, any of these storms that have been pretty impactful or downright devastating for the state of Florida, the back end of the hurricane, as they call it, the dangerous semicircle, has been the most destructive. And of course, that's what I'm pointing to right here. These two quadrants right here have the highest amount of energy and whipping action. So these are the parts of the storm that are going to be most devastating. Our preparedness for hurricane season, or actually any man-made or natural disaster, always starts with our comprehensive emergency management plan. That's a mouthful. However, we just call it the CEMP. After 1992, when Hurricane Andrew devastated Homestead, Florida, and cut a trail right through the southern end of the state, the governor of the state at that time knew that we had to be better prepared. So the Emergency Management Planning Office in Tallahassee mandated that every single county in the state had to have an emergency plan, a planning guide, if you will, for hurricanes, but also tornadoes, and just about any other man-made or natural disaster you may be able to think of. Some of those are pretty serious issues, and some of them are not so serious. In this particular case, we're here to talk about hurricanes today, so I will share with you that hurricanes consume the largest chapter in our emergency management plan. It's very comprehensive. And it makes sense that it would be because hurricanes have so many different moving parts to them when it comes to preparation and managing through the emergency. It could dictate under very unique circumstances that we actually have to evacuate the local area. It could mean we shelter in place. It could mean that we have a couple of different actions that we take if we're going to shelter in place and so forth. And I'll go through some of that. But The emergency management plan, view it as a checklist. It reminds us of everything that we have to do. Now, there's no single book on a shelf that is going to tell us every action to take. If there were, we wouldn't need ourselves here on the campus. We could just bring anybody in and say, please babysit the communities, and we're going to go ahead and batten down the hatches at our homes. Well, we can't do that. We won't do that. And we have people to look out after. But I did want to share with you, if you haven't seen this book, please take the time to take a look at it. Each department should have one. And if they don't, then it is available online as well. We can show it to you. Hurricanes are a storm where it gives us typically plenty of advance time to prepare. That's the one and probably the only advantage to such a monstrous storm. You know, unlike earthquakes that occur out on the west coast of the United States, hopefully not too often, they don't know. They don't know when the fault line is going to erupt and there is a earthquake in California. The people in Oklahoma, they might get, 10 minutes advance warning if a F5 tornado comes through. Both absolutely destructive. And so are hurricanes, but at least with hurricanes, the technology we have today with the National Hurricane Center, the National Weather Service, we can pick up these pressure systems, these low pressure systems that are over off the coast of Africa, and they start working their way toward North America. And typically we could get 2.5 weeks of time, probably most often a week and a half, and we can prepare, we can monitor, we can track, we can look at all types of systems, pressure systems that might divert that hurricane and send it up north, send it toward Bermuda, send it up toward Newfoundland, or send it down through the Gulf of Mexico up toward Texas. Hopefully, it goes out to sea and it just decelerates out to sea. That's what we would hope for. I want to just take one moment before we move on, because I said I would talk about this just momentarily, how a hurricane even starts. Well, we know that it starts off the west coast of Africa. These are Atlantic hurricanes. But how does it actually start? Well, what I would ask you to do is take your kitchen sink and put the stopper in it. Fill it full of water, okay? And then take the stopper out and watch what happens. Obviously, the water goes down the drain. The water should, I guarantee you, will go into a cyclonic direction, meaning that it will go in a counterclockwise as it goes down the drain. It's hard to see that until the last water dissipates out of the sink. That's exactly what happens with a hurricane. No, there is no hole in the ocean floor, but what essentially happens is there is a low pressure system. That's a hole in the atmosphere at sea level. And so all the air rushes in to fill it and stabilize it, just like a draining sink. All the water rushes in to go and fill that hole. Okay? But you got a couple other factors. One is the water temperature, remember, is 79 minimum, mostly 80, 81 degrees this time of year off Cape Verde Islands. So now you have an unstable air mass where air is rushing in, okay, to fill in a low pressure system. You now have warm water, which generates high humidity. And then you have one other thing, and it's called the Coriolis effect. You're experiencing it right now as you're watching this, and that is the Earth is rotating. The Earth is rotating on its axis. So we have the perfect formula. We have the perfect recipe for a storm. It doesn't start off as a hurricane. Typically, it starts off as a thunderstorm. We have them all the time in Florida. So a thunderstorm will start off right on the coastline, typically of West Africa, further north, up near Sierra Leone. Now we have thunder, lightning, rain. We have a low pressure system. We have that hole that I was referring to. And we have all this air that's trying to calm everything down. The earth is spinning on its axis, and we now have created a cyclone. And that's really what a hurricane is. What determines if that cyclone will be stronger and stronger and stronger is how warm the water is, the direction it's going, and any other air masses that are pushing it in a variety of different directions. So I probably got a little too scientific there, but I wanted to really share with you, hey, how does this storm really develop? Well, that's how they develop. Okay. And then when they do develop, they come toward us, and we have a National Hurricane Center, and we also have local weather services, and they tell us, you know what, we're going to go ahead and set a hurricane watch. Hurricane watch doesn't mean the hurricane's going to hit us. Hurricane watch doesn't even mean it's going to hit the state of Florida. But there is enough information to indicate that there is a high probability. Hurricane warning, that's different. You'll see as we move on a little bit that a hurricane warning, we actually have all reasons to believe that we are going to be struck with a hurricane. There are only two possibilities when we do have a hurricane that is coming our way. Two possibilities for action for Moorings Park, regardless of campus. Okay? One is we're going to remain right where we're at. We call that sheltering or sheltering in place. The other one is we're going to leave the area. Okay? Now, there's a lot of information that deals with both of those topics, but I will simply say this. The final decision to whether we stay or we leave will always rest with the most senior person, the Chief Executive Officer. The Chief Executive Officer has absolute authority to make the final decision and the best action to take in the interest of life safety for the entire community, residents, partners, anybody else, could be family members who are with us, and so forth. There's a lot of science, and there are a lot of tools made available to help the executive team and the CEO determine what is the best course of action. I will share with you also that because of Moorings Park's location, even though our height above sea level is relatively low, it's only about 8 to 11 feet on the original campus, and about 8 feet to 11 feet also at Gray Oaks, and it could be a little bit higher, a little bit lower over at Grand Lake. But we're not talking a lot of height above sea level. But generally speaking, how we are configured here along Goodlet Frank, and also airport pulling, and the way the buildings are built with garages on the first floor, we actually do okay with sustaining some flood water. For those of you who were here during Irma, you remember that we did actually have quite a bit of water on the campus. Okay? And yes, we had damage, but nothing that was beyond repair. The issue of sheltering in place takes into consideration the intensity of the storm, the amount of water we anticipate we're going to get. It also takes into consideration the condition of number of our residents. So there is such a thing as sheltering in place, but some residents may not be able to stay with us. The more frail residents, we may have to send some of them to the hospital. If we do end up leaving the area, we have agreements with a number of other locations up and down the state of Florida. They have agreements with us, we have agreements with them. And those agreements essentially say, we'll take care of your residents, we'll make space, we'll take care of food. You're going to have to bring some staff and supplies. These agreements are signed and entered every single year. We update them. So there's a lot of work involved in making sure that we're prepared for each hurricane season. The thing to remember, as I brought up earlier about the Comprehensive Emergency Management Plan, better known as the CEMP, that document drives everything. It becomes the foundation to decision making. So no matter what information we get from the National Hurricane Center, what we're watching on TV, what we're listening to on the radio, it all goes into a decision-making matrix. And it's a great tool, and it's a tool that we need. Those comprehensive emergency management plans have to be reviewed and accepted by the County Emergency Management Office every single year. So they scrub and they go through that. It's that serious, and that document is that important. Let's talk a little bit about our responsibility as partners. Okay? If there is a named storm, and not every named storm is a hurricane, but if there is a named storm, each department head has a list of requirements to complete. Those requirements are listed in the CEMP. And then it would be my responsibility to work with Collier County and determine what, if anything, needs to be implemented in the CEMP. Evacuation sites would have to be discussed. They would be confirmed with other off-site locations. If it's going to be healthcare evacuation or assisted living, our vice president of clinical services would make that contact, and it could be Sarasota, could be Tampa, could be in the middle of the state. There's a number of locations. I would share this, though, that for 2020, the COVID-19 virus has thrown a real curve at us. And if you think about it, here's why. We've been told to keep social distance, 6 feet or greater, for what, 75 days now? We've been wearing masks. That's going to continue for quite some time. When that'll end, I don't know. But we're entering hurricane season June 1st. It would be unrealistic to think that we could transport frail people who have underlying health conditions to another location where they would be very close to other people. So there is no question managing through hurricane season 2020 is going to require a lot of deep thought, and it's going to require a lot of good practices and hard work. But we'll get through it. We always do. I mentioned before that the CEO will make the final decision to remain in place or evacuate. We would never want to make a decision to evacuate at the 11th hour, as I call it, before the storm hits. That decision would have to be made at least 24 hours in advance so that we have enough time to mobilize and have people move off the campus. And the method of mobilization to move our residents in assisted living on either campus or healthcare at Chateau is distinctly different than mobilization and moving people in independent living. So, fortunately, that's the reason why we have our department heads who have a lot of knowledge and in-depth experience working with this particular book and checklist. Sheltering. Let's take the first one. We're going to stay here. That's what sheltering means. So the first thing we're going to do if we have a storm that's threatening us is we're going to recall our partners. Direction will be provided to both residents and partners. This is a nervous time for our residents, and it's also nervous for our partners as well. But residents particularly, okay? And so we're going to provide them with direction, clear guidance, and we want to take away any guesswork that we possibly can. Essential personnel are detailed as the red team. Now, notice the word essential. It's not written as important personnel. Everybody is equally important. But the way departments are set up, some are best postured to get us through the storm itself, and some are best postured to come in after the storm and bring stability. And that's exactly what the red and the blue team are. The red team comes in just prior to the storm and gets us through the storm. And then the blue team comes in after the storm has passed and helps to ascertain the amount of damage and continues to support the residents, support the staff, and so forth. We will continue to provide both our partners and our residents continuous updated information. In most cases, that information is going to come across a variety of methods, but I would say the primary method is going to be Informacast. So if you have a mobile telephone, you're going to want to keep that turned on, keep it charged. and you'll get updated information at all times. We'll also, as long as we can, broadcast on in-house television. We'll also, as long as we still have the internet, we'll keep that up to date. And then we'll also provide residents and staff with various different websites so that they themselves, if they have a desktop computer or laptop, they can stay in touch with what's going on with the National Hurricane Center. We're always going to check and recheck the entire campus. Storms of this magnitude that I'm referring to are extremely intense, and they have the ability to pick up objects. I'm going to show you some pictures, some photographs at the end that are breathtaking. But these storms with winds in excess of 120, 130, 140 miles per hour have the ability to pick up a piece of wood, a piece of glass, anything, and send it sailing. And it can, it can kill someone. It can absolutely devastate a building. So we want to make sure all that equipment is tied down. All those loose items are tied down and secure. Cars and golf carts will cover as many cars as we possibly can. Residents have parking. Everybody has parking for at least one car. Many of our residents have parking for 2 cars. We'll try to get as many cars under cover as possible, but we have more cars and we have parking or covered parking in the entire organization, and therefore some cars will sit out. But we want to try to cover as many of those as possible. Generators will be tested. So we'll go ahead and test those generators prior to the storm coming. That's all part of a checklist. And yes, we do check the generators anyways. That's a requirement through the regulatory agencies in the state of Florida. So we're running those on a frequent basis. I believe it's weekly. We're running those, and then we record the results. We'll also top off the fuel tank with diesel fuel. So we want to know that we are carrying the maximum capacity of fuel to be able to sustain ourselves for as long as possible, not only during the storm, but actually after the storm. The final thing, and we wouldn't do this too early, but eventually, yes, we will secure all doors and windows. Because if that intensity of wind speed gets inside of a building, it actually can cause a tremendous amount of devastation. All independent living apartment homes. Okay. This is what they have in them. Now, it doesn't matter if we're talking about the original campus or the Gray Oaks campus. And this also applies to the new Grand Lake campus. And that is for independent living, if we lose power, the generator will provide to the residents emergency lighting. So they will be able to see how to evacuate the building. Okay. The elevators will operate. You can see here that there is also a convenience, or what I call an auxiliary outlet in the home that is powered. In most instances, that's got a red cover on it, but not in all cases. And that will be powered, so somebody could put in a transistor radio. They could, if somebody had an oxygen concentrator, they could plug it in there. These outlets run off the generator. Now, there's only one. We'd only have the capacity to plug in one piece of equipment at a time. If it's a 2-gang outlet, you could put a couple of items on that. And then refrigeration. So the refrigerator, the ice maker, all that works. Now you notice in the top area there, in this first section, I didn't say air conditioning. That's because air conditioning does not function in independent living in any of the homes. Okay. Let's get on over to the health areas over here. That's different. Okay. Unfortunately, in 2019, I stand corrected. During Hurricane Irma in 2017, there was a tragic incident that occurred during that storm over in the Fort Lauderdale area where there was a number of older adults in a nursing home who lost their lives. Heat exhaustion was the primary culprit. And from that point moving forward, they enacted a law in the state of Florida that said that we have to be able to condition the air for X number of hours in nursing, and we also have that for assisted living. We meet or exceed that requirement at Moorings Park. Okay, So whether you're talking about Grand Place at Gray Oaks, or you're talking about Oakstone at Grand Place, if you're talking about Orchid Terrace on the original campus or Chateau, all these spaces are conditioned. They're air conditioned. And yes, they still also have emergency lighting. They have limited electricity in the outlets. There are only select elevators at work, but in most cases you have staff who are assisting those residents, and refrigeration as well. How about evacuation? We talked about the sheltering. I said that there are only two scenarios that could ever occur: stay here or leave. Under evacuation, this would be a rare set of circumstances if we would leave the area. There has been a number of studies done by very reputable universities in the country that have looked at evacuation associated with a major storm or a natural disaster. And in many cases, the actual evacuation becomes just as dangerous as the storm itself. Consider this. I-75 is the major thoroughfare down here in Southwest Florida. Virtually every vehicle would use I-75 to evacuate the area. If it's bad enough and the congestion is high enough, the Florida state troopers would reverse the southbound lanes. That did not happen during Irma, but it could. But now we're asking frail people to be inside of a bus. Some are on oxygen, medications, on a frequent basis. We have to meet their needs in that moving vehicle. Could be sitting in that bus for hours on end to get to destination at just a very slow pace going north. So it isn't always advantageous just because the storm has a high intensity to leave the area. What is important is that we have the capacity to take care of people right here on the campus. Assisted living and memory support residents, if we did evacuate, they would evacuate together, both campuses. So we would probably have different buses. The bus company that we would use is Naples Transportation and Tours, NTT. We've all heard of them, or most of us have anyways. Moorings Park Institute will assist IL residents if they want to evacuate. Even if there isn't a call for evacuation, we'll do our best to assist them with informing of lodging locations. If they are asking our help for rides, we'll do it as long as we can provide that to an airport. Any of those types of services, we're going to help. It's different once we go to what's known as a mandatory evacuation. Now that is essentially the word of the governor. And so when that occurs, our independent living residents would also evacuate, but some of them would take their own vehicles. They would drive themselves. They can come with us, and we would go to a destination, perhaps a couple of destinations. We are always working with hotels in the state of Florida to lock ourselves in for X number of rooms. Of course, we have to have a few locations because we don't know where the storm is going to go after it passes our area. So the last thing we want to do is experience the storm here and then go to a location where the storm once again hits it a second time. This evacuation process is extremely demanding. We do a drill once a year called a mobilization drill. And essentially what it does is it puts everybody who has a duty and responsibility in the CEMP, it puts them into action. And we prepare for moving medication carts, food and water and blankets and pillows. We get rosters of independent living people. We are essentially trying to coordinate the movement of over 1,000 people. And that's just residents. So you can imagine what that would be like in reality. Now we're also talking about having our essential personnel partners relocate with them, and nurses, aides, and so forth, recreation or activities, lifestyle, campus life people, and the list goes on and on and on. We did that during Irma, but not before the storm. We had to evacuate towers A and G after the storm because of water intrusion. But nonetheless, we moved a large number of the residents. All the tower residents, we moved up to Orlando. If we did move people, it's key that we have to notify family members and we have to keep them well informed. We have advanced a lot through the years, so it's not as demanding as picking up the telephone and calling everyone. Now we can update our website. We have an emergency link. Many of you have been reading off of that emergency link for the last 75 days with the COVID-19 pandemic. So we can keep real-time information, updated information available to friends, family members, acquaintances, anybody who has an interest in keeping track of what's going on. That would be updated daily or more frequently because we know that it's vital that people are comfortable knowing their loved ones are taken care of. In independent living, we have also methods to notify them. We have Informacast. We've talked about that briefly. We've used that throughout all of COVID-19. It's worked extremely well. But we would also send out messages to our residents off of in-house television, the website, and we would make phone calls to them. Vendors would be notified about supplies and supplies that need to be delivered if we did stay here and we sheltered here. So we would be contacting supply vendors, food, ice, water, fuel, and the list goes on. Cleaning supplies, you can just use your imagination. Certainly medications and healthcare supplies, and the list is long. We have relationships with each of these vendors, relationships that are in a written agreement form that is essentially a promise. It's a contract that says that, in the event of a named storm, we will deliver you supplies within 72 hours. So that's very important to have that promise, if you will. We need to be able to rely on them. Receiving facilities, I shared with you briefly a little while ago that, and I won't repeat all that, but it's going to be uniquely challenging if we would ever have to send our residents, particularly in 2020, to another location that's considered a receiving location. Only because this virus has spread throughout the state, and I'm sure that there are a number of locations that we probably have always had as a primary, secondary, or tertiary location that we're not going to be able to use now because of the virus. And then transportation providers will be notified as well, such as NTT, or if we also have special mobilization vehicles for wheelchair-bound people that cannot be met with normal NTT buses. So I just kind of went over the transportation, and this reiterates that. I do want to say that we provide transportation for 100% of all assisted living and memory care residents and 100% of independent living residents who choose not to drive their own car. Okay? If they choose to drive their own car, that's fine. Most important thing is we keep track of everyone. How about the partners? Actions on your part. Well, first of all, the department head has a big responsibility in hurricane season. They are the conductor of the orchestra. They have to keep the executive management advised of their preparedness, and then they also have to keep you, all of our team members and residents, advised. And so, they're really kind of in the middle of it, and I would always argue that they've got the toughest job. And those jobs, again, are broken out into red and blue teams. Now, before we actually go into a decision mode of assigning a red team and a blue team, all of our partners are still here, and we're all working collaboratively. It's only once we break up and we say, okay, effective this date, this time, that's a call by the CEO, then red team starts at this moment. At that time, the red team is it. They're taking care of our campuses, a red team at Gray Oaks, a red team at the original campus, and yes, there'll be a red team over at Grand Lake. Now, that red team might be a little different at Grand Lake because the community, although it will be large one day, we're building or constructing it in stages, and so therefore there is a relatively small number of residents under phase one and a relatively small number of partners as well. Each of you, and if this is a resident watching this video or it's a partner, you want to make sure that your telephone and your email contact information is current. For our partners, the best way to do that is through ADP. Okay? It's a responsibility in all of us to make sure that the telephone number to reach us is current, it's accurate, and then also residents, for us to be able to send you InformaCast information, your mobile telephone number needs to be registered so we can broadcast that out to you as well. I would also encourage everyone to have a plan. Plans change. Things change. Hurricanes heading for Miami, Florida turn right and they go out into the ocean. Hurricanes heading for Bermuda turn left and they go right into the state of Florida. Hurricanes looking like they're targeting Florida go up to the Gulf of Mexico and hit Texas. So even though you have a plan, expect that it will change. The real problem comes if you don't have a plan. And there is a number of actions that you as a partner, a family member, or a resident should take every hurricane season. Now, we have some handouts for that, but the last thing you want to be able to do is go into hurricane season and find out that you needed batteries, you needed to prepare yourself, your house needed to be prepared, and none of that was taken care of. Okay? So, spend a little time, put a little sweat equity into it, and prepare yourself so that whatever storm is thrown at us, we can endure it and move on. Okay. Monitor InformaCast. As I mentioned earlier, we've had a lot of good experience with InformaCast through COVID and even prior to COVID. So keep your phones on, keep your phones charged, and you'll get the real-time update information. And then I encourage everybody during hurricane season, you may not be a person who watches television. Perhaps you do or you do not watch the nightly news. If you do watch the news, it might be online. Whatever is your style of getting information, great. But do this. During hurricane season, pay attention to named storms. You don't have to be a forecaster. You don't have to be a meteorologist. But what you do need to do is be aware that an intense storm is heading our way. Okay? Having a little trouble here. Okay, briefly, organizational management. This slide simply shows the CEO at the top of the organization, and then each of these vice president positions really feeds data into the CEO. Why? Because as I mentioned before, he ultimately is going to have to make some decisions, and some very difficult ones. He needs to get as much information as possible. We are not the only people providing him input. He's also getting information through facilities. He's getting information from the dining operations and so forth. But he is in a position that he has to gain as much insight as possible to make decisions. Some of that information he will get from the Emergency Management Office in Collier County. Some of that information will come from the National Weather Service. Some of it might come from the police chief, the fire chief, and so forth. So, it's really collecting data, taking guidance. The mayor would be another one, and ultimately even the governor of the state. InformaCast, we've talked extensively about it. It's a great system. We have a kind of a organizational chart on who can send out those messages. We also are careful not to send out too many messages because it's like anything else. If you hear too many false fire alarms, it's natural for us to think that, oh, it's just another false fire alarm. So we don't want to get too conditioned to think that every time InformaCast comes across, it's just another hollow message. We want to really use that system for truly bona fide emergencies. Personal hurricane kit, you've seen this before. I won't go into every single item, but these kits need to be tailored for you and your family based on a number of factors. If you're a partner, obviously there are certain things that you want to have in here. And if you're a resident, based on your age, there are a number of things that you may need to have. And then there's some things we all need to have, just in the event that we would have to evacuate the area or even shelter in place, and the roads were not usable for a period of time. So, you can see that there's a myriad of issues listed here. This is not all-inclusive. There is a number of other things that could be added to this, but it gets the juices flowing. It makes you think a little bit about, gosh, what do I need to have in my house? Do I need to have some bottled water this time of the year? Maybe I should have some dry goods just in case to sustain food in the house, things that won't spoil very easily. I'm going to make sure that I have a little bit of extra medication this time of the year. I'm going to prepare a kit. Some people actually take a pillowcase and they have that kit available, even the kids. And then if they have to evacuate or leave the home or whatever action is taken, they have that, they can grab it, they don't have to scurry around the house and try to put it together. Challenges for 2020, the first thing is our National Hurricane Center says it's going to be a lively season. I don't know that we really understand the definition of lively season. And the other thing is meteorologists do not always get it right. There has been a number of occasions historically where they called for a very active hurricane season, and it was anything but. Conversely, there has been a number of occasions where they've said, it's going to be a relatively silent season. There won't be a lot of activity. The water is cooler. There's no El Nino running. We should not have much, and then we end up having a devastating hurricane. Some of it's science, and some of it is, some subjectivity on how they read all of the meteorological information. Okay, COVID-19 is going to present a problem for us. Okay, there's no way to hide that, shade it. It's going to present a problem to us. We've got to think through this a little bit. As I said, today is the 19th of May. We will still hold a roundtable discussion with all of our senior leaders and try to figure out how we're going to handle this and what shelters will be made available. The governor is trying to figure this out right now. This is something that is being looked at by our most senior leadership in the state. Hotels are probably going to become the number one location for evacuation, where in the past, that might have been a college gymnasium, a large open center of type like Germain. Those are not going to be able to be used because of the potential for infection of the disease. So we're just now in the early stages of reopening, and we have this to worry about, and it seems like the weight of the world's falling on us. But even through this whole presentation, we don't have a storm right now. We may not even get a threatening storm in 2020, but we do need to be prepared. That's all we're asking for is preparedness. Keep in mind social distancing, protective equipment, that won't go away. We'll continue to have that. So yes, that adds some challenge, but it's not an impossible challenge. So for 2020, Moorings Park will assist the partners on the Red Team by providing shelter. COVID-19 precautionary measures may not allow the family members of the Red Team to join us on the campus if we had to go ahead and go into an emergency preparedness status. I emphasize the word may because we don't know yet. We want to provide the best support that we possibly can, and we don't have the answer to that yet. Fortunately, I think we have a very good emergency management plan. All we need to do here is do a little bit of a modification to it because of the virus. As I mentioned, local hotels will be a key location for people to go to. If that's what we're going to recommend, we will provide lots of information to our families well in advance. And then anticipate supporting a larger number of residents than in previous hurricane seasons. Why is that? Well, with this whole pandemic, most of our residents, or a large number of them, who would normally go north in the summertime, have chosen not to do that. There's a lot of fear out there about becoming infected. They don't want to get too far away from home. Their doctors are down here. They have a sense of comfort and security. And so that large number of residents that's going to stay with us through this season, it doesn't make our life any more difficult, but what it does do is it makes us think about a higher number of residents we need to take care of and look after. That's all. Some final thoughts. Executive directors, department heads, they will be discussing with you further details as we prepare for this season. June 1st is when the season starts. A roundtable discussion, as I just mentioned, will occur, and then we'll get some of those answers from that roundtable discussion. And then we will do a full mobilization drill to be determined the date, and that's when we actually tell all of our vendors and anybody who normally calls the community, please allow us about 4 to 6 hours of uninterrupted time, and we're going to actually mobilize vehicles and walk through the paces so that if we had to do it for real, we're ready. I always like to end these presentations by showing some pictures, and I changed those pictures this year. This is the most current storm that struck the state, and also, of course, right through Marco Island, which was where it really hit hard, and Naples. And that picture is actually of Naples right there. So I don't know where in Naples that was taken, but you can see the magnitude of floodwater right there, and that is not a minor issue. That's 2005 Hurricane Wilma. How many of you were here during Wilma? Do you remember Wilma? Pretty devastating hurricane, 2005. When we started this presentation, I talked about the intensity of a hurricane building across the Atlantic Ocean. It starts off as a simple thunderstorm, builds up velocity with the rotation of the Earth. Can you imagine the intensity it took to turn over an 18-wheel vehicle like this? That's the power of a hurricane. That right there is Tampa, Florida. 2005, that is Hurricane Wilma. Hurricane Charley, 2004, Punta Gorda, absolutely devastated. And I want to also point out one thing here. They rebuilt Punta Gorda completely. This area here that was completely devastated is a reflection of what all of the area looked like. That was under the new building code after Hurricane Andrew, which changed the building code of South Florida forever. So you can see the power of this storm right here. It absolutely was like a tornado coming through. And Charley was one of those storms that actually struck the west side. It came across Florida, hit the west side, and then went out to sea in the Gulf of Mexico and then came back in. And Hurricane Andrew, 1992. Still viewed probably historically as the most devastating hurricane in modern times. Not the most expensive hurricane for a variety of reasons, but this is a hard slide to see. It had actually cut through the state, through Homestead, Florida, and it completely destroyed everything in its path. Nothing stood the test of time with Hurricane Andrew. Andrew was a Category 5 storm with winds that had hit right at 200 miles per hour. So now we're in tornado classification wind velocity. A terrible event in 1992. That concludes hurricane season 2020. I went into a little bit of areas that talked about what makes a hurricane. I talked a little bit about the CEMP and the preparedness responsibilities to our staff self-responsibilities that we have to assume for ourselves, some of the actionable steps we're going to take, information flow, very general in discussion. Your department head will now provide you with additional details, and we'll also get back with you with how we're going to tackle some of these challenges posed by COVID-19. But know this, if we do have a hurricane, I'm confident, and I'm sure you are as well, we'll get through it. Thank you.